So good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. And thank you for attending our presentation on environment and climate. Our presenters are LWVIL, that's League of Women Voters Illinois, issues specialists, Laura Davis, Palatine League, and Bill Koehl, Central Kane League. Our Zoom hosts are Judith and Edmund McDivitt. You will be on speaker view and muted. The presentation will be recorded and later put on the LWV OPRF YouTube channel. You all should have received the program outline from Judith. There will be a Q&A after the presentation, but feel free to answer your questions, to enter your questions in the chat anytime during the program. They will be read at the end. The program will go about 50 minutes, depending on the number of questions asked, but no longer than 1 hour. So now I will turn it over to Laura and Bill.
Thank you. Bill, I'm going to do the share screen.
If you've got your slideshow, you want to show your first slide.
I've got it here up.
Fortunately, I don't have any visuals. You're just going to have to go with my wit and charm.
You're doing pretty well so far.
Well, it's downhill from here on that part, but we got to start.
You
Get them
can
in
you
a good mood to begin with. That's what you go for.
Can you see it, Bill?
I can see it.
Good. Okay, we're
All
ready.
right, everybody ready? All right, I'm just going to talk for a few minutes each about the CEJA, which it's called, and then I'll talk a little bit about the regional climate action plans, which are a separate kind of operation. Both are happening now. So CEJA was just passed in September. It was an extremely dramatic thing. If you followed any of it at all, I think it was a bigger deal than World Series, and it certainly has a way more impact. And it did get passed. It was, some people say, kind of a mixed bag. It has two major components, one dealing with energy and the other one dealing with jobs and equity. And the jobs and equities actually turned out quite well. Some thought even better than expected. We've got about 80% of the original CEJA was in there. And at the end of May, when everything fell apart, then through the summer, they kept mixing several different bills together and coming up with a different mix, failing again and again until it finally got one that passed, and they renamed it. Instead of calling it the Clean Energy Jobs Act, it's the Climate and Equity Jobs Act. So it's still CEJA. Everybody knows it's like 80% of CEJA. You can't write a 1,000-page bill in a day, but they could grab whole chunks of CEJA that have been existing for 2 years and just say, let's use this part. And they go, okay. So they resolved it. The big issues hanging up at the end primarily was Prairie State, whether or not it would be closed ever or not. And that stopped it several times dead in its tracks. But eventually they did get a closed date on it. To tell you the truth, I'm not really excited about it. 2045 is a long ways to go for the single largest polluting coal plant in Illinois. So there is already work afoot to try to rectify that. It'll be an ongoing process to keep after CEJA and keep after Prairie State and see if we can improve it. I'll touch on that in a minute when I get to the Mayor's Metropolitan Caucuses and the Climate Action Plan. So a brief overview on CEJA. It has energy components and decarb components. So the energy stuff is what you would think of in a clean energy bill, is how to get more clean energy. So it's got a lot of funding in there for what's called adjustable block grant programs, and that's where the RECs come from. So when people go out to put on solar panels on their house and stuff like that, they say, well, you'll get some renewable energy credits back from the electricity you produce, and that comes from this. And it had run out at the end of the CEJA, and then now it's been reinstituted and upped. So we have lots of that. They've got some high goals. They want to get to 40% clean energy in the state by 2030. That's less than 10 years. And 50% by 2040, on their way to 100% by 2050 or sooner. Also has some solar for all programs for poor neighborhoods. There's a lot of provisions throughout the bill that are just generally considered equity provisions to help make sure that the clean energy transition actually helps poor people too. And it's not just rich people in the suburbs buying Teslas. There's more to this than that. So it has that happening. So there'll be a lot of clean energy happening. And then the other half is, of course, decarbonization, the fancy word for turning off the coal plants, and the gas plants, and the oil plants. Those come with kind of an interesting schedule. There was a bit of fighting back and forth with that also. All of the coal plants and old oil plants will be off by 2030. Gas plants have their own special schedule. Some every 5 years, 2030, 2035, 2040, 2045. And they range from turning off the ones that are in poor neighborhoods and do the most polluting worst first. So that was kind of an equity component to target that by a regulation, turn off the worst plants first. And that kind of makes it a distinction between price on carbon, which is market neutral, because frequently these are the very plants that are old, don't have many don't have much emissions control on them, and are less expensive to run. So those would like be teetering off like an old barge into the sunset for a long time to come, doing a lot of damage for a long time. So instead of doing the carbon price on this bill, we've got regulations that will shut down the worst first. And then middle-aged plants go later on. And then the last plants, gas plants on 2045, were the brand new ones they're still building. So this was another big labor stumbling block. They said, oh my God, these are like billion-dollar plants. We've got hundreds of people working there. They're not going to continue if we shut them down in 2030 or 2035. So they got a long life. So that actually helps a little bit with stability and transition. We're not shutting down everything all at once. So it remains to be seen how fast we can, in fact, build out all this clean energy so we can transition to it. As the opposition would say, well, you can't do that now. Everything would fall apart. I say, well, of course we can't do it now. And we're not talking about doing it now. We're hoping to do it in 10 years. Certainly 15 years will be good, but my God, 25 years, we won't be around if we haven't got this thing under control by then. So there'll be a lot of work to do, building clean energy and shutting off old coal plants. So that's the energy part of the climate bill. And then the other part is equity. And they've got two focus areas. One is on the workers and the other one is on the businesses themselves. And kind of the way they do the equity is rather than just leave grants out there so that they can be happened if you can find them, they come with packages that involve marketing and education, and training, support services, links to other businesses. The whole thing is a wraparound to find people and communities that need these services and see that they get them done, even including things like transportation and childcare to make sure that they can get to training and get into these jobs. And when they get to these jobs, there's work for them to do. The businesses have similar things with the grant programs. They have them start with money up front so they can have grants happening. There's 13 workforce hubs that will be built all across the state, and also 13 equity accelerator hubs for businesses that will help businesses. All of the support they would need, backup support maybe for bookkeeping, and certainly stuff for finding other vendors and marketing and training and whatever they would need to be successful. Not simply saying we gave them some money, they did fail to live up to it, because we know so many of these people we would like to see move into this stuff have been disadvantaged for so long. It's really difficult. Part of the labor's plan originally was to have it all just be apprentices, but I don't know if you know where the labor halls, the big ones, are out in the suburbs. So that kind of makes it really difficult for a whole large group of people to even get involved in projects like that, let alone be successful in it. So this program has about 20 different programs in that. I think the Illinois Power Agency that's in charge of the RECs and block grant program has got scheduled programs an hour long. There's like 7 of them to describe these equity provisions I just mentioned. So I just shortened down 7 hours to about 5 minutes. But that's what they do, is they help people get jobs, and they help businesses develop businesses in minority, BIPOC, frontline communities, however you want to phrase that. So that is like a nationwide leading bill, the fact that they have identified that and clearly spelled out how to do all of that stuff. Kind of learned it from FIJA when they kind of said, we hope it'll work, and it didn't really turn out that way. A lot of big solar panel installers came from out of state, hired a bunch of non-union, low-paid workers, and they weren't real happy about that. So that worked good. So CEJA's out. We don't have any fancy graphics or presentations or anything yet. They still have not put anything quite like that together. But when they do, they'll start having town halls with our local representatives. So they can get their face in front of you and they can show you, look what we did for you. And you can applaud, tell them thank you. So they'll keep up the good work. It's all part of the cycle of life here. So that's all coming. A quick one here on the climate action plans. There's actually two versions of these kind of. There's the original Greenest Region Compact. I don't know if most of you had heard of GRC2. And that's the plan that communities use, already made up, and they can draw from that as they will to enhance their sustainabilities. And it includes, it's probably 100 pages long, and it's got pages on things to do for energy and water and buildings and transportation, all the things different communities have done already. You can look through there and pick the ones you think your community might like to do, find out who else has done that, get in contact with them and learn more as you go. Last summer, which was only a couple of months ago now, the Mayor's Metropolitan Caucus, who's actually in charge of that, stepped it up a notch and came out with a newer, bigger report called for a regional climate action plan so that all of the communities could work largely as a region. I'm not exactly sure how that will work out. I've seen a couple of presentations so far with that's Edith Macra and my mayor, Kevin Burns, are two of the primary leads on the climate action plans. And it's so far kind of rehashing the Greenest Region Compact stuff too. They want to get more communities involved so they can organize more communities. So they're still focusing on that a little bit. It'll be interesting to see what do we actually do as a region that we couldn't do as individual communities or wouldn't do statewide. I'm not exactly sure. I did ask Mayor Burns pointedly, so well, what are we going to do about gas for the stoves and furnaces? He says, I got to tell you, I don't see a fix for that. So there are, it's possible, or, a lot of this stuff rolls out as a lot of a Christmas tree with lots of lights and ornaments and stuff like that. But somebody's got to say, is the tree tall enough? And they're like, well, it's a funny question. It's a funny question. So it remains to be seen if all of this will be good enough. Naperville came out with their own climate action plan about 3 weeks ago. It was like a 200-page report. It was awesome, put together by volunteers in Naperville. They have some really powerful people that just stepped up to do this, all of that kind of work. And so I went to look through there and said, well, what are they going to do to address climate change? I know you can do a lot of little things like light bulbs and solar panels, but even in their plan, the generic things that are out there for residents include, enhancing your energy efficiency and do more transportation by walking and biking. But they did say reduce waste, buy less. And I thought that was interesting of all places like Naperville. It'd be as if Oak Brook put that in there, buy less. This is like going against our cultural bone marrow here, buy less. And so, and I like that because this is kind of where our entire civilization, I believe, is heading. If we end up certainly going into a degrowth mode where we do less of everything, we'll have to find out how that works out. Who does less of what? So we're not sure how that's going to transition yet. There's a lot of hope in what's called the bright green movement, that we will just simply replace our fossil fuels with clean energy and go on as we had before. There's a lot of people thinking there's no way that's happening, but there will be consequences and transitions. So there's a lot to learn about how many different things to do like that. So just finish up as an interesting side note, when this is called Naperville Environmental Sustainability Task Force, they call themselves NEST, and their report was NEST 2036. When it came out, it had several pages at the beginning of it saying the number one thing Naperville should do is become 100% clean energy, which is, I think, job one, clean your power supply and then electrify everything else. And then it doesn't have to get any more complicated than that when you talk about climate change. There are about 100 things you can do. And then if you go into all into sustainability, there's several hundred things you can do. But for climate change, what do we have to do? The really big ask is to get our power supply to be 100% clean. And Naperville is one of the municipal co-ops that have long-term contracts with Prairie State, and they don't really have too much that they can do about it easily. But their contract ends in 2035. And this report said by then they should be demanding 100% clean energy or not renew the contract. And when the city took this report, which took 2 years to write, it was the results of the work of over 100 people. They kind of summarized their own and just totally left that part out. Published a report saying we agree with the NEST report as published, and then published the parts they wanted and skipped over that part. So that was a little disappointing. We did have a rally outside the offices Tuesday night and a meeting with the Chamber Council. About 15 of us went in and did a little public speaking, 3 minutes. Everybody spoke on the how essential and urgent climate change is and why we need to do something really big. Several of them were like lawyers and engineers and stuff that spoke specifically to their contract and things they can do about it. And the council kind of took it to heart. And several of them thought, well, maybe it is time that we should find out what we can do, and directed their staff to find out what can we do. Now their staff's going to find out they got a contract and they can't do much, and we'll have to make another step after that. But the council did not, as they usually would say, that's nice. Next item on the agenda. Instead, they sat around and talked for a half an hour about what are we going to do about climate change. So this is like in the hardcore area where people are starting to wake up and find out that we need to have serious and significant action on climate change. And we'll see how these communities are doing and spread the word throughout these CAPS, climate action plans in the regions. And that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Bill.
All right, so I will be talking a little bit on some other things that we've been working on, plastic pollution. And plastics is getting a lot of press right now because it is a toxic waste. It never goes away. There was a big drive by the chemical and the oil companies when there was a decrease in oil use during the pandemic to increase the growth in plastics. And there definitely was a COVID bonus because there were a lot of communities that had put through plastic bag restrictions or elimination, and all of that was suspended. Additionally, it seems that the plastic business came up with unique little things like ice cream cone holders.
Oh.
They use a napkin too to hold it, but then they use this to put the cone in. Plastic industry has created a lot of different things. And now there's kind of the inertia to get all of that stuff on track. Within the discussions on plastic and plastic reduction, a big push is to reduce pollution at its source. Recycling doesn't work. It's only about 9% of plastics that are actually ever recycled. And the key thing is you have to have a market for it. And the way plastics are made we have all those numbers on the bottom of containers, but they're all just feel-good numbers. They don't really mean anything. The only two that actually seem to have a market is 1 and 2, and the PETE and HTPP. And that's what drives plastic reuse. So the plastic industry and chemical industry is feeling some pressures, and that's why you're going to see these commercials about Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola recycling all these bottles, which, you know, you can only recycle them if you can get them back. Another push is this goal for producer responsibility, or what's called the EPR, the extended producer responsibility. And that's something driving and discussions going across pretty much, my understanding is internationally now. And I think overseas, they're much more interested in handling this problem than they are in the United States. There's a need for this producer responsibility would be similar to bottle deposit programs. Years ago, when I lived in Western Illinois and covered a lot of Iowa used to take, you know, all these bottles back, and they'd come back to the grocery store and they would all be for deposits. And so there's a push to kind of revive part of that. I put in here a Chicago movement to remind myself that there are push right now in Chicago, and Sue, when Sue was in Chicago, had signed off on one of those letters to ask the aldermen to put in requests at the restaurant levels to stop handing out plastic utensils and to decrease plastic use at the restaurants, particularly for takeout. It's interesting how politics work. So right now there have been competing ordinances from the aldermen on which ordinance to get through. And they're all very sensitive to the restaurant industry because that drives a lot of revenue in Chicago. So what's also going on is a lot of studies are coming out on plastics and plastic pollution. And really horrible is that plastic pieces are microplastics are showing up in human placentas. You'd think that that would be a red flag across the world, but not so far. And then they're of course found all over the world. Oceans, on tops of mountains, and the bottom of the ocean. I put in here the microplastics end up in the fish, and plastics in the ocean through all of the interaction with the waves and everything break down into these little microplastics. The fish eat them, and then particularly albatross is eating the fish, and they're giving it to their babies. And when I was in Antarctica a couple of years ago, they were already talking about the baby albatross dying because they're ending up with all this plastic in their stomachs. There's a concern that there will be more plastic in the ocean than fish very soon. So what's going on? So there's been activity at the state, and there was a polystyrene ban that was being talked about, and actually Senator Fine was leading it. And then of course, COVID put a kabang on a lot of things. So that is one thing that's being talked about to re-energize, get a sponsor and bring it out again. Other ideas are push for bag fees or elimination. And there are multiple ones, but I just put up a couple that have come up. At the federal level, there's a big push for the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act. And I want to mention that there's another competing one called Save the Seas. And I know Beverly and I had talked about that, but that doesn't put the responsibility on the producers. The Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act is the one that really will make a difference. And the other one is more of a feel good. So this is the one that we will be in some point if you guys want to join the Climate Google group. And when the action alerts come out, we'll send them out and have everyone asked to take action on this. Senator Durbin has been a great advocate for the plastic microbeads. He was a lead sponsor on that got passed in Illinois a couple of years ago to stop the microbleeds that are ending up in Lake Michigan. And he's been a key sponsor for this plastic pellets that are known as nurdles. Very strange. I don't know where it came from, but so they're trying to eliminate these plastic pellets that I guess end up with a lot of the manufacturing in boxes, and then they can fall over in a parking lot, and then the rains come and it goes off into the lake. The Basel Agreement is a big international agreement to get a handle on plastics and where plastics end up. I'm sure most of you had heard the story that we used to send all our plastic waste to China until China decided they didn't want to take our waste anymore. They said it was too dirty, and there was no market for it. So they gave 2-year warning to the United States. And so now this is kind of where you get this big push. Now we have to recycle better, or what are we going to do with all this plastic waste? Well, the Basel Agreement is an international agreement to control all of that plastic waste, where it goes, put responsibility on producers, and the United States is not a signatory.
Yeah.
So nuclear. This is a big issue that's been coming up. When Bill talked about the CEJA, and that was kind of a pushback, and I'm sure all of you had read in the papers about Exelon getting bailed out again, and that they were being punished for bad behavior on the FEJA bill, and they got a bailout from to keep their nuclear business open. And there was in CEJA some money to keep the nuclear plants, the Dresden and Byron, going. But from the perspective of we need a bridge right now to move up to the increased wind and solar. So they really kind of needed it there. And Exelon did get some money on that. But where are we at in the United States? For Illinois, it's a big deal. We have the highest number of nuclear plants in the nation. We have 11. And right now it supplies about 50% of electricity in Illinois. Across the nation, nuclear is probably about 20%, but it's a big deal here in Illinois. The question is what to do with the waste. So the number shows 78,000 tons in the United States and 10,000 in Illinois alone. Right now it's stored on site. There is a concern that there are separate sites. They're at each of the plants, but there are also risks with moving the stuff. There was some discussion about the plant in Zion that got closed a couple of years ago, and they are right now sealed in supposedly safe containers, but the concern is it's right on the border of Lake Michigan. And what if something goes wrong? So, what to do with it? Well, New Mexico is another state that has a lot of nuclear plants, and they have a new position or something from the state coming forward to say how they should handle their nuclear waste. And we were sent an invite to participate with them. So Bill and I had offered this as an issues briefing in February. So I hope you all will come, and we're going to try to find a speaker to talk about nuclear waste and what to do with it. But it's really going to be a big issue as these plants keep going, and with the waste that we currently have out there, what are we going to do about it? As I think I mentioned too, there is a concern even just transporting it because of the risk if something happens or anything could happen. So right now, the League of Women Voters, we work under a US position. And as I said, New Mexico has the second highest number. They did a study and they came through within a new position that was approved on storage of spent fuel. And also this waste is graded. Actually, during the Trump administration, we got an alert from one of our coalition partners that Trump was trying to decrease the class levels so that a class that would have maybe been rated as a high risk, it was going to be downgraded and it could be thrown in our local landfill dumps. And we were successful in getting signatures on that and preventing that from happening. But so this is just a reminder, we do want to do it on our issues briefing. So education on this will be Sunday, February 6th through the next Saturday. And the ultimate goal will be for us to try to concur with the New Mexico position for League of Women Voters, Illinois, to concur with that. That can be our position too. These PFAS, this was offered from we talked about this, the Upper Mississippi Interleague organization the other night. They did record it, and it is excellent to watch. But PFAS are getting a lot of discussion. They are actually chemical substances that are polyfluoroalkyl, and there's a lot in this whole class of chemical substances. They were created, little history here, after World War II. It was kind of a fire protection thing. They are, as a class, chemically stable and water soluble, and they move. So if they end up in water, some of you may have read this week Michael Hawthorne's article in the Tribune, where they talked about a fire retardant sprayed into a burning coal mine, and nothing was told about it. And somebody saw this white foam bubbling up on the creeks coming from by there and took a picture and sent it out. And it's this polyvinyl PFAS, and they move. That's just a sign that they move from the water within the mine, and they're up on the creeks. And they are right now ubiquitous. They're everywhere. They are used on stain, water-resistant fabrics. Gore-Tex would be one thing. They're in furniture. They're in carpeting. In fact, again, Michael Hawthorne, great investigative reporter, did a several day article on carpeting and these PFAS in there and the danger to children. They crawl on carpeting. Animals that might have it on their paws and lick on it. And so that was about 9 years ago, I think that series went. They're used in firefighting foams, as I mentioned, for this mine. They're in food packaging. So you go to Burger King or McDonald's. I mean, why is it in there? But it can be in there, and that studies are showing it, and there's pressure now for them to get it out. It's even in dental floss. What does it do? It attacks the hormone system. It'll attack the immune system. It's been implicated in cancers and autoimmune and thyroid disease. In other words, it's not a good thing. In the past, the chemical companies tried to have it banned as a certain chemical, but that doesn't work because they just redefine it and make it into a new chemical. And it really needs to be the whole class has to be banned. Just a little history too, 1976, the Toxic Substance Control Act, there were 62,000 chemicals that were grandfathered in. And in the United States, they don't have to test chemicals for safety. You have to come back and say, there was a problem, and now we have to look at it. That's reversed in Europe. So there is big drive now to stop the production and use. There is a real big concern on how do we clean it up and how to remove it. Michigan actually has been kind of taking a lead on this because they had a lot of bad things happen and they had a lot of public pressure to do something. So these are some references on the PFAS. You can check it out. As I mentioned, the League of Women Voters Upper Michigan region. Once that's released as a recording, or if you could probably go on their website, it would be really worth to take the time and watch it. And then the movie that's been recommended is Dark Waters. So just a little update on some of the other issues that we have been involved in. And let me tell you, there's a lot going on in the climate and environment, and you cannot, we're trying to, really cannot do it all. But another group that I've been involved with is this 30 by 30. And this is actually an international push to protect 30% of land and 30% of water by 2030. President Biden came out with his plan, the American Beautiful Plan, and it is the core. This 30 by 30 is the core of it. Now, how do we get it? International drive, as I said, national drive. The goal is we really need to save biodiversity. We have to protect our water, the drainage, and land resources. And the loss to open lands has been exponential in the last, like even 20 years, just amazing. So it also improves sustainability with climate change. So Illinois, just a few things. We happen to be one of the most ecologically diverse states. I was just shocked when I heard that last night, actually, on a webinar. And right now, though, we only have 4% of our land that's public land. We are ranked 44th across the country in public land ownership. 75% of the land in Illinois is used for agriculture, and only 4% of food grown in Illinois is actually consumed in Illinois. It's mostly corn and soy, which is used for basically animal feed or commodity use. And the loss of agricultural land is kind of been, in my mind, accelerating. Where I live, particularly a little bit further west, all along 90 if you're going north, or 88 going west, all this farmland is up for sale. And we have some of the richest agricultural land in the country. Mm-hmm. And it's being sold off for development. So it's something that we're organizing with to try to get listening sessions and make people aware of it and try to take some actions. So what are some of the other issues you could participate in? Food waste is huge. 40% of food is wasted in the United States. This impacts landfills. It's actually such a waste too, the loss of all those great nutrients that can improve our soil. And just to get healthy soil, it takes years and years and years to replenish soil. And then the problem in the landfills too is that when or if it breaks down, it's methane, which is more dangerous and more powerful actually than other greenhouse gases. So big push to do composting. And I think it was Highland Deerfield, I was told recently, my physician, that their green group in their community pushed their local village to get compost bins so that all that food from the homes can be put in there and is picked up by their waste management company, which is, we can do that.
That's what Oak Park does.
Oh, you're already doing that?
Yeah.
That's cool. That is so cool. So that's it, just kind of a run through, and I put down any
Yeah,
questions.
thank you, Laura. Thank you so much. We had some questions in the chat, but Bill already answered them.
Oh, Bill's an overachiever.
I get that. But I'll read a couple anyway. Let's see. One of the questions was, will there be any money to retrain displaced carbon energy workers? And Bill said there are some programs for transition, but not anywhere near what was in the original CEJA. Can you all see these? Or I'll just read them. This one took a big hit. I said about 80% of CEJA survived, but this part not so much. Jody asked, hopefully those who are displaced will be made aware of the training programs for all. And there is a program, Bill said, to do exactly that. 41 million a year for fossil fuel communities and workers. And Tara asks, of all the issues you mentioned, what is most important? Laura, Bill?
I can't even answer that. I mean, I'm so emotionally involved in it.
Yeah, it's a tough question to answer. How do you prioritize these things?
Well, there are steps that we all can take, and nothing moves fast. So even that idea of the compost, so now we have a little bit of a wave with different communities doing it. So there's models out there, so we can do that. Some things we can take actions on ourselves, and that would be, here I put in some tips too. This is just, chips, but if you think about it and aware every time you do something, what you buy, is it something that really could be recycled? If you can buy it in aluminum or glass or tin or something versus plastics, that is a recyclable. That, other than horse manure, is probably the easiest thing to recycle and compost foods, but then aluminum and paper, clean paper, and glass are the next ones that are probably easier to recycle. So there's a lot of things we could, if we just increase our awareness, I think we can make a difference with.
I've noticed a huge decrease in the number of garbage bags. We really have like one garbage bag a week since we started composting.
Mhm.
And the village picks it up, and you can share it with a neighbor. There is an issue with apartment buildings being able to do that because there's no space apparently. But yeah, it's a really good thing. And it makes me feel like, you figure you buy a watermelon, right? How much of that gets thrown out, right? All that goes in composting, corn husks, melon rinds, all of that stuff. It's good to be able to, put it in your composting bin. So that's working for us. I did read something the other day that, and I can't remember what act it was in the newspaper, that there will be subsidies for people who buy solar panels and switch over to solar. Is that a state thing, Laura? Do you know? Or
Bill could probably answer that because that's part of CEJA.
Yeah, there is that would be the renewable portfolio standards and RECs. So yeah, that should be coming. The specifics of the programs I'm not totally aware of. I know that they added 3 more, call them adjustable block grant programs, some about schools specifically and some about community development ones as opposed to individuals on your house. So there's a lot of that. So there'll be a lot of more solar panel development and more solar farms. Yeah, that would be good. But as far as the one most important thing is always to contact your elected representatives and let them know how you feel.
Good point.
I went to a rally for my Congresswoman, Lauren Underwood, at the Kane County Cougar Stadium. And there's enough of us, 150 or so, to fill up the right-wing bleachers. And she talked for a while and then took questions for about 45 minutes. And out of the 150 people there, except for me, nobody asked about climate change. And this was like on an August afternoon. It must have been 90 degrees. We were all dying in the heat in the sun. And it didn't dawn on anybody.
Remarkable.
And my only question was just to have her, what do you think is important on climate change or something, just like so that the audience could see somebody who is important, recognize climate change is something we talk about in public.
Yes, Tara goes on to say, I've heard the emissions is the most crucial, but just wondered what your thoughts were.
Reducing emissions. So
Emissions.
those are the goals. The IPC kind of builds their modeling as far as how aggressive we have to be over the emissions, because they can do the math and the science. They show at a certain emissions level, we're likely to have a certain increase in temperature. And I'm not sure how they translate the temperature increase into the destructive force, and have decided that, one level is better than the other. They all look crazier than the next, but they did, and they have to do it for budgeting and finance reasons, so they could divvy it up among all the nations. So they put a target of a certain temperature and said, this is what we're going to aim at. And so that involves this much carbon in the atmosphere. That's the carbon budget. And then they divvy it up by countries. And then you have your, I forget, there's a phrase for that, a target you're supposed to hit. Nobody's online to do that. There are a few small countries around that have gone clean energy, like Costa Rica and stuff like that. But
Costa Rica's great.
Yeah, they worked at it really hard, but for the most part, no, we're on our way to a terrible place. They're still saying it's possible to get to, like, now they've even adjusted it from 1.5 to like 1.7 in some of the literature I've seen. It's possible if we do anything. So technically that's real, but the politics is a different story. As we saw what happened trying to pass CEJA, we aimed at 2030 and we ended up with 2045, and it was because of the jobs. And I think that's going to be really difficult. Fossil fuels aren't just big ornery businesses. It's a lot of workers, and those workers all vote, and they all have Congress people, and trying to get that undone is going to be difficult in the long run.
Yeah, if I could say on there too, when you listen to these experts talk about, of course, emissions is the big bucket, but they look at it in categories like energy, heating and cooling, and transportation. And we can make changes. In fact, part of CEJA is supporting electric cars. Of course, you have it, having electric plug-in car myself, if you can get solar and then you put that charger in there, and then electric cars are beautiful, it's just perfect. So, and then that thing that Bill said, it's so true. And it's talking to your legislators. They need to know that we care about this issue, even if you call and say, I'm just really worried about the climate, and we have got to take some actions here. I was at an event a couple of weeks ago, and the state senator from the Bloomingdale Roselle area was there, and it tended to be Republican, and that was where we had a lot of pushback. But I thanked him for voting for CEJA, and he said, well, it's what my constituents wanted.
Yep.
So it does work, but they have to hear from us. And right now, 70% of Americans are concerned about climate change. So there's big movement behind it.
So that would be another one, is the Build Back Better Act, or this part of the infrastructure bill that's being tied up now. There's a huge push to make sure it maintains its integrity. Republicans want to cut it in half or drop it altogether and go with the shorter one only. So the strategy is to kind of hold hostage to the littler bill that the Republicans are in love with and say, you can have it when you give us the big bill. And that's what the fight has been about the last couple of weeks. And I believe Nancy Pelosi had actually extended the deadline for this like about a month, so that legislators could come back and say, it's not just a $3.5 trillion bill, because nobody knew what was in it. So they have to come back now, and there's going to be a concerted push to expel out what were they going to do with the $3.5 trillion, of which one huge segment was climate change action, along with a lot of stuff for all kinds of healthcare and other issues in there too. It's escaped me at the moment, but yeah, so that's a big ask. You should probably be getting a lot of like call for actions and whatnot from different groups saying, call your senators and tell them hold tight on the Build Back Better Act.
Mm-hmm. So another push, of course, too, would be to put a price on carbon. And of course, the Citizens Climate Lobby has been working on that for years and years. And it really would make a difference. I mean, you can do the carrot and the stick, and that would be more of the stick approach is that, and also you pay that, you have to pay for the pollution. So whether or not it's at the source or where you utilize it, wherever that tax would go, but that would make another difference.
That's actually in the Build Back Better Act, and they went and they were all excited. I get the Citizens Climate Lobby stuff, and they're having a big meeting coming up soon. They're so excited that when they decided to do a price on carbon, they said, well, what do we do? And they pretty much just picked up the Equity and Dividend Act, which is the Citizens Climate Lobby's version of the bill. Who knows what version of that will come out, but that's what's going in now as a part of our price on carbon is the Citizens Climate Lobby's bill. So they're like, all of a sudden, it's like we've been pushing forever and we're getting like a quarter of the way there. And then they wake up one day and they're like, it's in the bill. It's in the bill that everybody's pushing for. They're like, what happened? So, yeah. So that would be a powerful thing there.
Well, Laura and Bill, I want to thank you so much for all the work that you have done on this.
Thank
You
you.
need to feel really good about it, not just talking the talk, but walking the walk. And we really appreciate it. We really appreciate your presentation tonight. And I want to thank everyone for coming. This is the Google group, Climate.
Yeah,
Yeah,
if you
so-
want to get extra, if you want to link in, and this is how we've been communicating with people, and to take action or just webinars or anything coming up, the climate at leagueofwomenvotersillinoi.org. And we have to add you to the group though, correct, Bill?
Yeah, I think if you go to, if you're on Gmail and you go and you click those little buttons in the corner, it gives you the options to look up 20 different things, but find groups. You can find Google groups, or if you send me or Laura an email and we'll get you in there. And then,
Okay.
so you apply to get in and then you're like, what happens? And then you get a note that says you've been accepted or whatnot.
Wonderful.
Why don't you guys put your emails in the chat and then people could just reach out to you that way?
Oh,
Okay, and then
excellent idea. We just saved the
This is one
chat.
that's coming up also, the Bloomingdale Roselle. They're going to do one on November 9th. So just so you're aware. Okay, I'm going to stop share, right? I feel like I'm in over my head with this stuff here.
And then there is the LWV Lake Michigan organization that is going to be having their conference on the 15th and 16th of October. So please attend that, feel free, I'm signed up for it. Yeah, so thank you again, everyone. I want to especially thank Judith and her Edmund for hosting the presentation this evening. We really appreciate their help and their work. And thank you all very much for coming. Thank you again, Laura and Bill.
Thank you, everybody. Keep up the fight. Keep up hope. We need hope.
We need hope. Thank you, everybody.
All right. Good night.
Good night.
Night.